Now I wanted to talk about the south-facing slope myth. The fact that deer have to be on that south-facing slope. And I hear it from clients all the time, readers, commenters, viewers on YouTube. And it's one of those old deerisms that people hold true. And when you follow some of these deerisms and how deer relate to habitat or hunting strategies, and you just hold true to what the old timers have said for years or whatever you listen to, then a lot of times it leads you down the wrong path of understanding actual true deer behavior and why they're doing something. And one of those is the south-facing slope, because every deer in the area will be on the south-facing slope, right? Wrong. We even have some of our best areas in Wisconsin where I've shot a lot of deer that are facing to the north, and there's a reason for that. And you see right now, we're up here, I'm facing the wind. I just want you to start this with, and we're gonna go relocate to a little bit quieter area, but I want you to think about this wind, whatever direction it's coming from, is in my face right here, and it's 10 degrees. 12 degrees, and I'm facing that wind. I'm gonna get frostbite as a deer. I'm gonna lose the tips of my ears. I'm gonna lose energy, and in a very harsh winter, I'm going to take life off the end of that winter and energy that I drastically need to help me survive the winter, even if I'm facing those south winds. And I'm facing that south slope and those south winds. So when I have those south winds in my face, then I need to go over on that north side. And so it's really critical that you understand this myth about the south-facing slope. And we're gonna go relocate an area. I'm gonna continue talking about this. And it's interesting because people find sheds on south-facing slopes. I think there's a reason for that. People find deer beds. And let's go in and tuck out of this wind. And we'll talk about this a little bit more, because understanding this will help you understand deer behavior, why deer bed in one location versus another, and ultimately that'll help you be not only a better deer hunter, but a deer herd manager and habitat manager at the same time. Now we're down here in lower elevation, and we're out of the wind. It's very windy up on top, and when deer bed, they choose to get out of the wind. That's the most important priority. The fact that they're facing south, east, northwest doesn't really matter. If they're not soaking up those morning rays, a lot of times they're getting out of the wind. In fact, for like a south-facing slope, you have heavy northwest cold winds. Let's say there's a cold front, temperature drops from a high of 35 down to a high of 10. It's probably northwest winds that ushered in that cold air 99% of the time. And when that wind comes through, then of course they're gonna be on that south-facing side, but they're getting out of the wind. Now let's fast forward 2 days, 3 days after that time. That wind, a lot of times, is stable wind in the north portion of the country, north half of the country. Most of the country is south-southwest, south-southeast. That's a 35% wind. And don't take my word for it. Go check out Weather Underground. Look at that history in the past. Pull up any date that you want, look at the month, and look at those winds, and look at the total of days that are south, north, east, west, and count them up. Just average them. What you're going to find over an October, November, December time period in most hunting seasons, as some type of southerly wind is going to be that stable wind 35% of the time. The fact that that slope is facing south really doesn't do, or it's on that southerly edge, doesn't work very well when you have those heavy south winds. So what'll happen is that temperature drops from a high of 35 on average down to 10. Those northwest winds ushered in that cold air. Those deer probably wanted to be in a location they could tuck and get out of that wind. Go to the first day, second day, third day after that front rolls through, and at some point the wind's going to moderate and get back into that typical stable southerly wind pattern. And when it does, if it's 12 degrees, 14 degrees, 17 degrees, even though it's warmed up a little bit, that wind will be directly in a deer's face on that southerly slope. They need to get out of that wind. So a lot of times they'll get on the shady side of the ridge in that situation so they can get out of the wind. It might be that they're in the shady side, meaning the north side. It could be that they're facing east, west. It doesn't matter. A lot of times they have to get out of the wind. That wind robs them of energy, and during the winter months, fall months, their deer are very adept at actually avoiding areas that will stress them out, burn energy, and take days of their life off at the end of a heavy winter period. Now often people, if you're looking for sheds, the south facing slope is a good location to find. That doesn't mean that the deer are bedding there nonstop. What it means is the south facing slope has a lot more vegetation on it and a lot more growth. So deer are going to spend a lot of time, especially on public land, in areas where there's not a great consistent winter food source. They want to be on that south facing slope because there's a greater amount of volume in deer browse and diversity of habitat, so that there's a lot of food available. So they're going to spend a lot of time on that south facing slope. It might be that at nighttime, those south facing slopes, even if the wind was buffering that area during the day, those deer can sit there and stay out of the wind. There's no wind during the night. There's a lot of times it's calm, and they can just browse to their heart's content, and they'll drop their sheds in those locations. But as it relates to your deer hunt, what is the direction that deer want to face when they're bedding? It depends on their food source. If we have food up top in this location or food in this distance, then those deer, those does are going to be up in that first bedding area, and the bucks behind it. Really doesn't matter what direction they're facing. We have deer consistently in the same hollows. And a lot of times here where you have a hollow where it's north facing, if there's northwest winds, they can get on the west side of that hollow and get out of the winds, because they're above the ridge system. And if you look at it like this, just look at my fingers here. This is a north facing slope, and it's a big bowl coming down. If there's winds buffering this side, they'll just get off of this side. They'll go 100 yards over and bed on this side, so they're completely out of the wind. If the winds are out of the south, they're coming from up here, they're out of the wind. If they're out of the east, they're coming here. So they can get out of the wind in a situation like that almost anywhere in that entire hollow. A lot of times you'll see if the south facing side of a woods, it's getting that sunny midday high heat, but if it's being buffered with winds and high winds, they'll go to the north side of the woods to actually get out of the wind. And so really pay attention to not which way, especially when it comes down to daylight bedding, not which way the sun is coming up, and not if those deer are facing south, but always think about where they're going to go to get out of the wind. And it'd be no different than you or I. If we're stranded in the woods for the night and we have to seek shelter, we're going to get out of the wind, and we're not going to really worry about where the sun's coming up. We want to just get out of that wind and survive, because that wind will kill you. It's going to rob energy from you, and ultimately, again, you need that energy for survival. And we're in a location right now where the wind's swirling. We could go all the way down the bottom. If we get down to the creek down below, we'd have zero wind. It's just a light breeze right now compared to where we're at to begin with up in the farm fields. The south facing slope myth. Always don't rely on that advice that deer are always facing south. They always have to see that sun in the morning. Again, think about where are they going to be to get out of that wind and out of those current conditions. And what's interesting in that case, I always believe that when it's a little bit windy, deer move a little bit more. And it's not because of the wind. They're not going to be up in that high windy area moving, and you have to hang on to your tree stand. They're going to be on the lee side of the cover, the lee side of the ridge. They want to get out of that wind. And during the rut, if you stick all those deer, and a high percentage of the deer, in the calm side, the lee side of the hill, the lee side of the cover, it could be a cedar swamp, they're on the downwind edge, whichever direction that is, boy, you can throw a lot of deer into a small area because they're getting and they're moving to get out of the wind, and that could be a great spot to hunt. And it always relates back to your habitat. If you have private land, you're looking at managing the entire parcel. You need to manage for all wind directions, stands in all wind directions, so that you can actually hunt no matter what the conditions are. And think about that in public land where deer are used to moving great distances to find a sheltered place that they can bed, whether it's removing themselves from hunting pressure or actually getting out of the wind and finding a spot that they're not going to be robbed of that high wind condition, regardless of which way the deer are actually facing, whether it's a south facing slope, north facing slope, east, west. You can find great hunting on public land if you don't just focus on the south facing slope, but actually focus on where deer can be sheltered, get out of the wind, regardless of whether they have that south facing sun that you think you need for them to heat up. They're going to find shelter. And where they're finding shelter, if you have a tree stand there, you're going to find some great hunting, especially when you ignore the south facing slope myth. I'm excited to tell you guys about my latest web class. It's how to plant food plots, how to design your food plot program, and it covers everything. And really, there's 30 videos, over 10 hours, 11 hours of footage, workbook, hats, all that stuff on top of it, I urge you to check out the link. But I cover 5 main areas: critical food plot concepts, where to plant, how to create, what to plant, and finally how to plant. It takes you through that step by step so you can make your own decisions that apply to you and build a great high quality food plot program this year, whether you have decades of experience or no experience at all.